So we're going to go and have another look at a story. We did a little bit on this when these men were convicted after their trial, convicted by a jury of the rape of a young woman. The reason we're looking at it again is firstly, the victim has spoken, and secondly, they're appealing. But it's always struck me, and maybe I'm not alone in that there's more to this. I have a few notes taken down here before we start our podcast. We're not often disorganized, but I found myself putting into capitals mature men as being a key part of this. So, Anthony Hickey, who's 39, Fabio Vicente, who's 42, and Martin Zolfaghari, 34, were recently tried for this horrendous rape.
Yes, they were tried and convicted. And as you said, they had a number of people supporting them in court. And I think there was a shock to see men who had certainly had some standing in society convicted in the manner that they were. And I suppose one of the reasons they clearly were convicted was because some of the messaging that had gone on the day after. But yeah, they had
between them, and they were a group.
Yeah,
they were operating together. The court found. I mean, the jury convicted them. They insisted they were innocent. The victim, as you said, had to get on the stand to give evidence, and eventually they were convicted. We'll go through a little bit of the detail that was heard in court in a minute, but they're operating in a group, and they're an age that it just seems very difficult to imagine people of this age, of their standing, with the careers some of them have behind them, etc., that this is just a one-off thing. I found from the evidence that they seemed very calm and organised from what you could hear from the evidence. And in particular, I think the victim has recently said she watched back the CCTV or the videos that were taken. It felt as if there was something
I suppose,
easy with them about it.
Yeah, I think there was, certainly from the prosecution, were making the case that this was a predatory act, that it was, that it wasn't some sort of drunken experience. Obviously, the men were driving the car. One of the men was driving the car. So that was the case put together. And when something like that is put together, you have to look back and say, is there a history that has led up to this point? Does that put it in a different sort of a different view on what has occurred?
Exactly. So let's just look at what occurred. And this was heard during the trial. The offence took place on the 31st of August 2019, and the victim in question had been at a birthday party or drinks or something with friends, and she ended up in town in this club with another friend of hers who was working or had something on the next morning, and sort of, as most people can imagine the scenario, out having fun, dancing, popping away, enjoying a few drinks. The friend wants to go home, but this girl knew that there was other kind of friends of hers in town, and she thought she'd hook up with them. But they had sort of started talking to this group of men that were in the club.
Yeah, I mean, look, a totally normal thing to do up until that point. Nothing that doesn't happen thousands of times across the country every weekend. But at some point in the evening, the woman says that she sort of she can't remember it fully. She certainly put forward the notion that she had been spiked. However, that bit of it was never proven. But certainly she becomes sort of, basically loses some of her memories of that moment. But her friend is gone, and she speaks about remembering dancing around with them, but really doesn't remember too much. Obviously then the CCTV picks up the story, sees her leaving the club in the company of the three guys and ultimately getting in a car with them.
Which is parked nearby.
And at that point, her initial recollection was she thought it was a taxi.
Yeah.
So she's clearly can't remember the exact details. But what happens is she suffers an oral rape in the car. She remembers kind of coming to and being raped, and ultimately she goes back to a house and suffers further sexual attacks.
And it's Anthony Hickey, I think, who is ultimately convicted of that rape in the car. of orally raping and sexually assaulting her. Hickey is from Carrickmines in Dublin 18 and is a fitness instructor. As all these men are kind of working in and around the fitness industry, they're obviously very well built. They're working, Vicente anyway, has been working as a personal trainer, but he's also, we find out later, working as a male stripper and in other businesses. He's a particularly interesting character because he looks like the one the others seem to have speak to before they give their statements to the police.
Yeah, so
he's a central character in it.
Yeah, so what happens is, the next morning the woman wakes up and she's in a very distressed state. She instantly goes. She
wakes up in a bed with Hickey.
She wakes up in a bed with Hickey. She has very hazy recollections, but she goes home to her friend, and her friend ultimately convinces her to go to the authorities. And she goes and receives medical attention, and also goes to the police. She gives a statement, but she's unclear of all the details. However, ultimately, the guards are able to trace the men through CCTV. Now, at this point, it sounds like a lot of these cases that never get to court.
Yeah.
Because the woman, she's got some facts wrong, like the taxi. Now, the total explanation for how that happens. But this is a classic case of something that mightn't have come to court.
Mm.
However, as part of the investigation, the guard sees phones and they find videos, basically, of the phone that the woman was videoed while she was being raped. There's messages between the men. There's a discussion at one point. The woman is heard saying no on one of the videos, and the men discuss that. So all of this really, this is of hugely evidential value. And of course, we can't know why the jury made a decision, but the fact that digital evidence is there clearly plays a huge role in it, and they are convicted.
And this woman has since given an interview to Orla O'Donnell from RTE, and she talks about the memories she has. She particularly talks about what she remembers from the nightclub, dancing in it, and she talks about how she sort of had a basic conversation with these men, and then it starts to get kind of hazy and fragmented, but she repeatedly goes to try and get her coat from the cloakroom so she can leave. But every time she goes, she feels one of them sort of steers her back onto the dance floor and dances with her. And I mean, they feel as if, from what she's saying and obviously what they've been convicted of in court, as if they're sort of swarming around her, and they're kind of like, as she goes to try and escape, one of them will just batter back into the middle of them.
Yeah, see, so this is the predatory aspect of it, I suppose. Look, you can't distinguish between sex attacks. A sex attack is a sex attack, but the woman who her memory of the night is hazy, but she looks back on the CCTV during the trial. She sits through all those weeks of evidence, and she says, looking at that footage, she describes how they kept a very close eye on me. This is in the nightclub. One was always watching. One was in and out of the club like they were organising, I don't know, a transport or something. And yeah, I watched them. So to watch that and to know how dark that night ended for me, that was really difficult. So that is, she feels there's a level of organisation, a level of planning, and that they set out to do what they ultimately are convicted of.
If the car parked outside the nightclub, which she hazily believes is to be a taxi, she kind of recalls, she says, the car pulling over, and she believed what was a taxi driver getting into the back, opening the door and unzipping his trousers. She knew she was going to be assaulted and wasn't able to move. She was paralysed with fear. But what actually the CCTV catches happening is the men leaving the club without having to say much to one another.
Yeah.
They know where they're going. They go to the car, two sit into the front seat. There is no back seats in this car, and Hickey, on his way to the car, takes his jacket off. He starts to strip on the street as he's getting into the car. She remembers being in the house, which is Hickey's house they go to, and she remembers being upstairs and kicking someone off her, trying to kick and not being able to lift her legs or arms, which of course suggests, you're in some way, now, people fear can paralyze people
Sure.
as well as drugs, and there was no drugs found in her system. She says to Orla O'Donnell in this interview, "The next memory I have is I saw one of the men beside me. I didn't know where I was. I went into pure panic. I feel so lucky that I had a tiny bit of percentage left on my phone. So I tried to order a taxi and it took a while to get one confirmed. As soon as I did, I just ran." So she's brought back to this house by these three men who video her, and they each assault her.
Yeah.
And then they swap these videos. And at one point, there's a suggestion that they're looking for a video from one to the other, and they go, "Which one?"
Yeah.
I mean, all of this is screaming that this wasn't the first time this happened. Now, I've been making a few inquiries, and I'm hoping that people will maybe contact us. There's a email here, and you're be totally in confidence, or you can. My DMs are always open there on Instagram, Twitter, etc. Who's on Twitter anymore? But X. Sorry, God, it's like you and your pounds. But anyway, it's Instagram, whatever you feel comfortable with. Just maybe drop me a few lines if you knew these guys, and just a little bit of their backgrounds. But just from making a kind of a few discreet inquiries, it seems as if certainly Vicente, who is living in Enniskerry, he's Portuguese. He's over here about 10 or more years. He has a kind of background as in the army or the navy. He's a special services agent, so he's skilled in many things.
Yeah.
He's a small guy and seems to be very sort of domineering, although also lacking in confidence, perhaps for many reasons. He's built up pretty big, strong guy who's working out in the gym. He's running a number of businesses and he moves about a bit, but he ultimately lives, I think actually at one point in Carrickmines, he lives in Bray where he opens a fitness business. He's working as a personal fitness instructor there. And he ultimately ends up in a house up in Enniskerry, which from looking at the area seems to be in a very sort of highbrow area. Now he's probably renting this house, but it's very close to Krista Berg's house up there in that sort of lush kind of mountainous area. You'd wonder how somebody working as a fitness instructor, and maybe I'm in the wrong job, is affording this kind of a environment to live in. He's got a couple of other businesses, kind of a checkered, sketchy kind of past, but he seems to have also presented as a really normal guy who was in relationships with people over a time and was, I suppose, one of these people. He sounds as if he was insecure underneath it all, but also brimming in confidence if you met him. Do you know that kind of way?
I do. And he was obviously working as a stripper as well, which is, not everybody's career choice. All of Anthony Hickey as well was running a lot of fitness classes in sort of middle class gyms. We were told by somebody who knew his work that he had a lot of women around him at all times, as did Vicente. That fitness industry facilitated that kind of thing, and we had people tell us about how they used to say all the women around Anthony Hickey, they called them Anto's Angels, all of these women that he was training. Anthony Hickey did have a criminal past, and that did emerge at the end of the trial.
What did he have?
He'd had a sentence for assault a good number of years ago.
Yeah.
And I think he had spoken to people about turning his life around through fitness. Zolfaghari, who was also, he was,
sort of know least about him, do we?
Well, I mean, to an extent. I mean, he was heavily involved in MMA, mixed martial arts, massive Conor McGregor fan, also involved in that whole world of fitness and kind of the things that surround it. So, yeah, they were normal guys with a good reputation, but...
Well, they were definitely not normal guys.
No.
Was what we're trying to get to the bottom of what exactly was going on, their friendship. You have Vicente and Hickey definitely at one point have a business together, so they have some sort of a relationship, yet people didn't necessarily see them together. However, they obviously had certainly this night that we know of, that they travelled in this pack into a nightclub in Dublin and clearly picked out a vulnerable woman and played with her like a cat playing with a mouse until they put her into the back of the car. And I mean, I have to say, I think it's one of the most awful, not that any sexual attack or rape is anything other than that, but it's a really depraved and, such an organised thing to do that I just find it really difficult to think that this was the first and only time that anything like this happened.
So the woman, when she spoke actually about the videos, saying that was the hardest thing to see. And she was saying, beyond everything else, for a woman to be secretly recorded like that, and then for that to be distributed, is a crime. And it would be a crime. It would be a crime that could see you go to prison for revenge porn, as it's called. Beyond anything to do with it, the sex attack in itself, I mean, that alone is a criminal act. And for that to be shared around, and even for her to be saying no, for that to be laughed at, that bit alone. Now, I suppose this case, when you think about it, I mean, how many times over the years have you received calls from people who say, I made a statement, but the DPP wouldn't bring the case because it was one person's word against another, or in this case, it could have been three people.
Yeah.
And all that would be said was she was drunk. And,
Because, of course, what did they say?
Well, ultimately, they said, yes, she was drunk, but that doesn't mean that she can't consent.
She consented to that?
Yes, that she consented. And the fact that she was drunk doesn't, that was their... I mean, ultimately, they couldn't say it didn't happen because the video proved that it did, their own videos. So instead, they said that, just because somebody is drunk doesn't mean they can't consent. And, that was their case. Amazingly, they seem to have convinced themselves that they were likely to walk free and seem to have been sort of shocked. And, but...
It shows an arrogance. I mean, going from an arrogance from the night within the nightclub and what they did to go through a legal case to be found guilty, and now they're coming up to appeal that, and they have, obviously, they're within their rights to appeal that. How long is this going to take, this appeal? Some other appeals take up to 2 years to get to court and to be heard. And I think there was some talk recently from Jim O'Callaghan, the Justice Minister. He's confident that the appeals court is working better and more efficiently nowadays than it has been previous. But in the meantime, when you have something as serious as this occurring, you would like to think that in the background, the Gardaí are already ahead of it, and they are investigating further if these men are linked to anything else, any similar attacks, any similar reports that have been made, perhaps without as much detail or without the CCTV. Is there any other trace of them anywhere else? And what is their background and what have they been doing? And, that they're maybe perhaps that their ex-partners have been spoken to, that people around them who knew them have been spoken to. This feels like something that should be investigated further.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think the level of planning and the I wouldn't say sophisticated, but certainly they were determined and looked like they knew what they were doing. So, of course, with crimes like this, guards, they investigate the crime that's in front of them. But, it often serves it well to look at other things and to speak to other people. And look, people have spoken to us about this in the broad sense, people who had contact with them one way or another. And yeah, it's of course there were people who were very surprised. They knew them as, good guys in the fitness world. But there's also other people who felt that they were, certainly Vicente and Hickey were tricky people, let's put it that way, to say the least.
If that woman had woken up with less of a checkered memory in the bed with Anthony Hickey and knew that she'd been out and drinking that night and dancing and, last remembered sort of, dancing a bit with him on the dance floor, maybe leaving with him, or maybe she doesn't know, it goes blank after that. But somebody could have woken up in the bed with him and just presumed, I had a blackout there, but I was obviously with this guy, and in shame and whatever else you'd feel, just go home and say nothing about it.
Well, look, 100%. I mean,
there's a confidence from him to stay in the bed and allow her wake up beside him, isn't there? He's not hiding himself there. He is physically in the bed beside her. It's not like they have, bundled her back into that car and dropped her somewhere or anything. He has kind of, he is stating nearly by doing that. Yeah, you were with me last night.
Yeah, look, I mean, let's be realistic. If they hadn't got the phones, the guards hadn't seized the phones and found the videos, the chances of prosecution are small. I mean, the statistics are clear. I mean, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but, you're talking about the vast majority of these cases never come to court for that reason. I mean, obviously, sex crimes can be hard to prove, and they sometimes aren't proven.
Yeah.
But they, they could have got away with it, but they didn't in this case.
So listen, again, anybody listening or watching this, please contact us, because we really are interested to see if we can find out any more about these men, Anthony Hickey, Fabio Vicente and Matin Zolfaghari. And any information that anybody's worried about, it will be handled in confidence totally and utterly. And email is crimeworld@sundayworld.com, or come through to mine or Niall's DMs. Yours are as open like my own.
They are.
I know how to use them. But so though it is interesting to stay with this case and to see if we can find out or dig out any more information. So thanks, Niall.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.